Welcome to The Brave Journey Within with Jim and Jenn. This show is about the spiritual journey and all of the challenges, healing, wisdom, and consciousness expansion experienced along the way.
Welcome back to another edition of The Brave Journey Within with Jim and Jenn. Hi, Jen.
Hi, I'm
Today,
really excited about our conversation today. This is a great topic.
yeah, so it is the topic is spiritual bypassing. And what does that mean?
Yeah,
So,
exactly. I think you could ask 10 different people and you'll get 10 different answers.
well, I'll just read the definition as I found it. Uh, it means or describes when you use spirituality to sidestep life's challenges or emotional wounds. Coined by clinical psychologist John Wellwood, this behavior blocks the path to authentic healing and instead offers a sugar coated escape rather than a solid solution. So, it's the use of spiritual practices and beliefs to avoid dealing with relationship hassles, because none of us have those, right?
Yeah.
Uh, Emotional challenges and developmental tasks, explains Robert Masters, a psychotherapist and author of Spiritual Bypassing, when spirituality disconnects us from what really matters. Simply put, it's a defense mechanism. So there you go. Part of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's really important to talk about. I think most people at some point in time will do this. They will spiritually bypass. They'll disconnect themselves from what's happening around them. But I also think the opposite is true. I think too many times we dive so deeply into the drama and the trauma that we don't find our way out. And I think a lot of times it's about finding some sort of a medium or the middle road where you're paying attention to the emotion and the things that are happening, but you're also taking that spiritual wisdom and knowledge and applying it. But it can be tricky.
Yeah, I mean, they get into some of the things here where it's like, it's spirituality really, I would say, forces you to work on your stuff because that is the path of your evolution. You have to do uh, some psychological work on yourself to really tap into your soul's fullest potential, I would think. Um, but they were saying, like, I guess I'm gonna do research on it. It leads to a road. If you're doing spiritual bypassing, it leads to a road filled with more complexities and unresolved issues. So it's
Mm.
like you're never really making progress. You kind of get stuck.
Yeah, I don't know. It's definitely very difficult. You had mentioned a Mind Valley article where they talk about this, and they had some really great points. Do you want to go ahead and dive into that? Because I think it was really well done.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of what I'm referencing right now here. So in this article here, it says here's some typical examples of what this might look like. Dodging emotional reality. So you ignore emotional pain after a challenging event, like a breakup, by reciting phrases such as "the universe knows best."
Yeah.
Um,
Have you
Toxic.
ever?
What's that?
I was going to say, let's go one by one. Let's just
Oh,
like
okay. Yeah,
discuss
yeah,
each
yeah.
one. So, have you ever done that, Jim? Have you ever just been like, nope, doesn't bother me. Universe must know best?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. I think
Um,
it's pretty common.
Trying to think of like a creative example where something crazy happens and you're just like, okay, I don't even know what to make of this.
Yeah.
Uh,
Or I just can't deal with it right now. It's too much. I need to survive in the moment and then I'll come back and look at that thing. But yeah.
yeah, I'm trying to think of some of the more heavy things that have happened in my life. I guess sometimes I'll give you one example. Um, I was applying for a job and really wanted it, and it paid really well, and it would have been in my head probably pretty cool, and I didn't get it.
Mm.
And I was hurt for a little bit and then realized, once I had dealt with it that, I would have failed miserably in that job. It was completely different. Like, it really wouldn't have fulfilled me in a way that I want. It had status, money, like a title, like, it was all these things that society says are, you're working for, but it wouldn't have been fulfilling to me, and it took me a while to kinda get there with that. Um, in that sense, I think the universe did know best,
Yeah.
but there was still emotions and stuff to process with that, and sometimes it takes a while to do that. You're not diving into the emotion and the trauma of it right away.
So it's interesting. I mean, one of the things I know from everything I've been through personally, but also working with people when we're talking about emotions, there's always like two sides of the fence that your emotions are your intuition. It's everything that you think it, is if you're feeling a certain way, then that is your authentic truth. But there's another side of the fence that talks about, well, the way you think about a thing is often what creates that emotion. So, like that mental emotional tug and pull going back and forth. I think part of the difficulty in all of this with this conversation is trying to figure out, well, are you feeling what you're feeling because you really are authentically in that space, or are you feeling what you're feeling because you're thinking about it a certain way? So,
You mean,
it's
like, when
almost
you
like,
get stuck on your perspective?
yeah, because your point of view forms your emotions. And there are different ways to form a different point of view. You can change and shift things. So by saying, well, I guess the universe has my back, that's not always a bad thing. In fact, that might be the most healthy way to approach something. Um, but I guess, I've just met so many people and how they work through situations like that. And I don't know that there's any quite one right way of approaching it. But I think it's really important for people to understand that if they're having an emotion, they do need to question their beliefs behind it and what could be creating that experience in that moment. But then also to honor the things that are coming up for them, even if they're thinking about it incorrectly, or there's better ways to think about something. Um, because I've just known so many people who get stuck in that emotion, where they aren't able to find their way through it because they're stuck in that belief that they're in that's really holding them back from a bigger and better understanding. So it can be really complex, and every situation might be different. So what do you
Yeah.
think about that?
Well, in relationships, if you are like, "Oh, that didn't work out, the universe knows best," right? The defense mechanism is not dealing with it or thinking that you had nothing to do with it, right?
Mhm.
Well, I guess it wasn't supposed to work out. They didn't do this or didn't comply or didn't meet expectations or something like that. Um, I think if you're being honest with yourself and reflective, right? Like if the, unexamined life is not worth living, then you owe it to yourself to say, why didn't that work out? What led to that? And maybe the universe really did know best, or maybe I didn't get the lesson yet, and so I'm gonna keep repeating that theme until I do.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
you can blame the universe forever. It's not gonna, let you pass go and collect 200 bucks until you deal with your stuff.
That's so true. Oh my gosh, that's so true.
So I think that's where the pitfalls come in with that.
Yeah. I kind of see it as pitfalls on either side. You can think your way out of anything and then not ever take responsibility for what has been showing up in your life. Or you can get so stuck in the emotion and the feelings of it all and not change in that way as well, and not see the bigger picture and not see, how this could be working for you, or how it could be the best thing that ever happened that you're going through this thing. I mean, I've definitely had times where I had a disappointment or something happened, and I shifted my belief system around it, and then I was like, "Oh, I think I'm actually okay. I'm good." I didn't need to go through a grieving or a expression of anger or anything like that because I suddenly was able to see a different point of view for what happened and was immediately
Oh,
like, this is more truth for me. Like, this is better. This makes more sense in this moment. Not to say that I haven't spiritually bypassed because, I think that is you're always trying to figure that out. But
well,
yeah,
and if we're being honest with ourselves, we all have coping mechanisms and defensive
yes.
coping mechanisms, and we all do these things. So this is not, like, well, I don't do this, but you probably do, and you should be aware of it.
Right.
And so it's
Yeah.
that catching yourself, but that's one. This is your favorite, toxic
Toxic
positivity.
positivity. It's so funny. I only ever heard of this a little while ago, and I was like, "What is toxic positivity?" Um, I think if you're living in a false reality, which how do you even describe that? But if everything is like, no, everything is good, the sky is falling, but no, God must think it's okay. Okay, the sky is falling. Whatever. I don't know, but it just seems like I think that's another one where that's a hard one to define because I think in general, I tend to be pretty positive. I go through periods where I'm not. And maybe I'm more toxic negative at times. I think all of us could be. But I think it's
It
more about truth. And if you're in alignment with the truth that sees something in a positive way, I don't know that I would call it toxic, even if somebody else might. What are
well,
your thoughts?
how they define it is it's keeping a positive facade during tough times and denying the presence of any negative emotions or problems.
But again, that's so subjective. Like,
Um,
I
it
might be
is.
able to look at a problem and be like, "I know this is really difficult right now, but I also know I'm gonna catapult from this." I can have a really good positive mindset about something. I can also be very negative at times too if I'm not, like, balancing myself, but I think that's so subjective.
So what pops into my head as I'm thinking about this is like being in the Peace Corps, where you know they say it's the toughest job you'll ever love, and you get to this place, and for me it was Bangladesh, and you would have people there who were talking about how awesome and great it was, and in some ways it could be, but it was also a pretty challenging place, and I saw a lot of people there have, I used to, there was a watering hole, at the because the alcohol is illegal because it's a Muslim country, British club, they had alcohol there, and they would often joke with the Peace Corps people, like, "Oh, you guys have, like, rose-colored glasses on. You guys aren't seeing reality here." And for some people, that was really true. Like, they did not, to the point where, this is real life, right? Like, people got into some really challenging situations because they didn't admit, like, "Hey, these are not great things. You may not wanna walk alone at night." Like, these,
Yeah.
you know, um, and things happen. So, you have to be aware, but be honest with yourself about what's around you, and otherwise, you can really put yourself in potentially bad situations. Um, no one can tell you that, though. Right, you have to see it for yourself. Going back to your point about perspectives, it's okay to have a positive attitude and see the good in things, but make sure it's authentic and, you know, you're careful that you're not lying to yourself and telling yourself things are safe when they're really not.
Yeah, true. So true. But yeah, on the other side of that though, again, I think it's like finding that middle space where you're seeing how you can shift your mindset, how you can shift your belief system and turn things around on its head so that you can get what you can get out of it and turn something into the best situation possible. versus sitting in the negative of a thing. You know, what's coming to mind is maybe even like a car accident. You know, you won't be coming out of a car accident going, "Yes, I just got into a car accident." But you can shift your mindset and beliefs around that because if you live through that car accident, even if you had injury, I mean, like if you talk about like even near death experiences where people have passed and come back, that's probably the most pivotal and beautiful point of their lives, right? And they can choose to focus on maybe they had a conversation with spirit or they were gifted certain healing abilities or something, right? And it totally shifted and changed their life for the better. That accident, some people, even with all of that, might think that was the worst day of their life because maybe they were disabled for 3 years, or maybe even their whole life, and they couldn't, be who they were. But then other people will see it, oh my gosh, that was the best thing that ever happened to me, right? So some people will call that toxic positivity because you're not addressing, well, but you're disabled, you know? So that's where it's just, to me, it's so subjective.
You
And
also have people who have had several near-death experiences because they didn't learn their lesson.
right, I know, I know. Well, I think it's one of those things where we just have to question every aspect of whatever it is we're going through or we're struggling with to find out what's truly helping us and what's not. And what emotions are we aware of? What are we feeling? What are we resisting? And dive in. I don't think it should ever be ignored. But I think there's a balance of, but where is your consciousness in that? You can be aware of, let's say, the emotion of anger. And let's say that accident happened by a drunk driver, like a hit and run, even. And maybe you have this anger from that drunk driver who did the hit and run, and there's judgment and there's all this stuff, but it really does no good to be in that space. It does no good to sit there in that. You're not solving anything. So if there's a way to acknowledge that you're feeling that way, but is there a better or healthier way to approach it or to work through it by seeing a counselor or going through hypnosis or getting some healing done, um, where you're approaching it from a really healthy way instead of living in there? Because then that becomes, the negativity, the toxic negative. So I don't know. What
Sure.
are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think one of the things that come to mind when you talk about, um, toxic positivity for me is sometimes people, I think they get it misconstrued with like optimism.
Hmm.
Um, the belief that, okay, things may not look great right now, but I'm optimistic that we can win this game. It's not toxic. We may not win the game. Um, my son will probably hate me for sharing this, but he was losing a game one time. We were playing soccer and they were down like 3-0. And I was like, so I was very upset about it. I'm like, it's it sounds like a lot, but it's only 3 goals. You never know what'll happen. And he's like, no, it's over. We're gonna lose. It's just very negative, very pessimistic. Sure enough, their team kind of starts to come back and they ended up tying the game. And his coach doesn't put him in because he was not in a good emotional space,
Yeah.
which was the right decision. But afterwards, I'm like, I told you the game was not over. You didn't believe me, which is fine, but you had an opportunity and you missed out on it because you weren't able to handle it in that moment. So I think you can be optimistic and it could be authentic versus being optimistic and like, okay, at this point we're beating a dead horse, like we're not going to come back, like it's we're down 10-1, there's a minute left, there's just no it's possibility. So maintaining a optimism in the sense where things are possible versus maybe not, or just seeing getting stuck in a negative mindset and not seeing an option or a possibility to get through a situation.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. It reminds me of a client I had one time, and she had a situation in her life where what was coming through in guidance, it was almost like it was a 60-40 chance of something happening, and the 40% was what she wanted, and the 60% chance was it not working out, right? And their guidance for her was to, okay, so you're aware that 60% exists, but if you're placing all your energy into that 60%, that becomes 100%. But if you're placing your attention and your focus on that 40%, then that is a lot more likely to happen. So just because something, let's say, is like a 60-40 outcome, it doesn't mean it's like you're shifting timelines and you're shifting the way things are actually going to come out to be by placing your attention and focus in certain things. So I think that this is why sometimes spiritual people might be spiritually bypassing things, because they're trying to put their energy to what they want to come out, what they want to happen, which is when you're talking manifestation, that is exactly what you want to do. If you're sitting in fear, let's say you have money worries and you're not going to make ends meet. And if you're sitting in fear of that all the time and you're living in that, then chances are you're not going to make ends meet. You're expanding that as your possibility and you're feeding that outcome. So there's truth in that as well, and how you're approaching from a very mature point of view. As long as you're not hiding from something, if you're really truly and authentically, mindfully placing your attention on what you want, that to me is spiritual mastery, um, in the midst of difficulty, and just really focusing on what you want and trying to expand the energy of that occurring. But I think where we go wrong and where I've gone wrong in the past is where I've got healing to do and I can't see where the thing is. So maybe there's a karma or some sort of ancestral pattern or some trauma or something that I've had that is blocking my ability to actually get what I'm trying to focus on. Like I've definitely seen that happen to me. And so it's almost like every single thing is it's an individual experience, and it's hard
But
to know.
you have to be willing to look at the uncomfortable
Yes.
places. Yeah.
Yes. And fully address it, but at the same time, staying in that positive space of, okay, but I know that this is helping me work through this thing. This is, if I stay in a positive space, that, yeah, it's possible I could win that game. Anything could happen. Then it allows that to actually be possible. If I was to play that game that your son was in that negative space, there's no way if you're in that negative space, you're not going to win. You're not even giving it a chance. So I don't know. I can see both sides of things. I just think you have to find that way to navigate in there and make sure you're paying attention to both.
You're very balanced in the law of moderation today.
Well, what else did they got?
Pardon me. They have over spiritualizing. So you turn
Hmm.
every minor setback into a spiritual test or a karmic lesson. That, hmm,
Hmm. Because I tend
what
to
do you
think
think
that
about that?
nothing happens by accident. So I tend to think, well, maybe I am a little bit too spiritual about things.
I mean, is that making a mountain out of a molehill or getting stuck on minor things and turning them into bigger
I don't
or things
know.
of deeper meaning?
I like to be in awareness of what's going on around me because I feel like it's trying to show me stuff about me. And if I ignore it, it tends to be that the messages might get bigger and louder until I get it. So I don't know. I'm not sure I necessarily agree with that. But I think if you're making too much out of something or freaking out too much about a certain thing or putting too much weight on something and not just being mindful and aware, but maybe making
You know,
decisions based on, I don't know, what the astrology says or something, you know what I mean? It's like,
okay.
you gotta
I think I
balance things
got
out.
I
I
think I
don't
got
know.
a good one with this.
Okay.
When when someone um, insults you or says something that, triggers you, that's that's what the definition of kind of doing shadow work. Like, why am I triggered?
Mhm.
Um, you could get lost in that or not, like some people get caught up on things like that and they get stuck. Well, why did they say that? I don't know.
Hmm.
Maybe they're just a jerk.
I mean, that could be.
Like they're just the zebra's being the zebra. Like that's what it is. There's no deeper meaning to it. And maybe your lesson is to just ignore it.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, I mean, to me, maybe this is probably why I'm probably one of those people they're writing about. I would tend to think that it's showing up in my experience for a reason. Okay, so they said something, it triggered me, and it threw me off my game for a minute. Now, it might just be a test to see if I've mastered that in some way, and how quickly am I able to come back to balance and center after whatever that thing was. Um, or it could mean that, hey, there's something within me that I really need to pay attention to, um, because they just called me a name. How do I feel about that? I don't know, but it does bother me. So if there wasn't something for me to heal within me, it wouldn't have bothered me. I'd been like, whatever, and that would have been to me passing that test. To me, it's the universe's way of showing you where you still have work to do. I love the talk of triggers because to me, triggers always serve a purpose. So yeah, I look at things like that. I do. But I also don't make a mountain out of a molehill if I can help it. I just try to look at it and be like, oh, that's interesting. I'm really bothered by that. Why am I bothered by that? And it's not about why would they do that. I try to make it more about, why am I bothered by that? Why do I care what they think? Or why is that comment, irritating me or bothering me or whatever?
You can really go down the rabbit hole with some of these things, though, and
Right?
sort of neglect your life if you get caught up in it, though.
Well, see, I don't even know that this is neglecting your life. To me, this is what life is trying to show you. To me, it's paying very close attention to what life is trying to show you and not neglecting. But if you're locking yourself in a room and ignoring the rest of your life because someone called you that name or whatever it is, well, that's a problem.
Well, that's what I
Yeah.
mean. Like, people get stuck in that sometimes, where it's like, "Hey, you are making this way bigger of a deal than it really was," you know?
But it's funny with that because if someone really got, I don't know, let's say someone called somebody a nasty word or whatever. And for some reason, you have those things that just happen and they seem like they're little and insignificant, but they stick with you. Have you ever had that happen? And you just keep replaying it in your mind. And then you're just wondering, why is that bothering me? That was not a big deal. But what
Sure.
if it's trying to scratch at an old wound or something that really is underneath of that needs to be healed? And maybe this is the universe's or God's way of trying to help you access that thing. Or maybe you're in the midst of trying to close your heart because you've been heartbroken so many times. And then that thing that just happened, maybe it was a friend, maybe, or something, and it hurt you. And maybe it doesn't seem like a big deal, but it's becoming bigger than you think it should be because what's underneath of that is big. Does that make sense?
Oh, it makes sense. In balance, I think these things are healthy, right? Like, you're not sweeping it under the rug, or you're not inhibiting your emotions. You're
Yeah.
being mindful of them and dealing with them. That, I think, is, what you're talking about is, like, being able to do that. Well, I think where people get in trouble is where they get stuck. And, you know, uh, they create this story, this negative, stress reactivity cycle that continues to sort of haunt them day in and day out, where,
Yeah.
it becomes something bigger than it really was. Or it can be, right? Like, because you could make it worse.
Right. Absolutely.
Um, what else we got here? Avoidance of responsibility.
Yeah.
So you assign blame to karma or destiny for personal matters or life situations.
Well, yeah. You
Well,
know,
so you have a perspective on that.
I think that can go
And
either way, honestly. I've definitely seen spiritual teachers not take responsibility for what they've done or the way they approach things. Um, But then I've also seen people who follow spiritual teachers who take things the wrong way and get very triggered and don't take responsibility for how they're taking it. Because, if you think about it, like even us talking on this podcast, there are things that we've probably said that might have triggered somebody.
Sure.
We're not meaning to cause harm in any way, but there's always somebody who's going to take it that way, right? I've had that plenty of times. Whose responsibility is that, right?
It's not
So
not mine
I
if
know,
you
well,
get
I mean,
offended.
but
No, I'm kidding.
no,
I've
but
pissed
I
off plenty of
tend to
people.
agree with that to a degree. I mean, to me, you can say the word apple and offend somebody out there. You know what I mean? Like, I
Absolutely.
don't think there's any conversation you could have where you won't offend somebody and you can't take that responsibility because that's just how they're perceiving something, or they have a certain mindset or beliefs that they're going to see what you're saying through, and it's going to get warped or twisted or misunderstood or something.
Sure. Telephone.
So I think that conversation of responsibility, again, it's one of those things where it's like, well, there's somewhere in the middle there where it makes sense because if you're not asking if it's your responsibility, well, then you're probably not taking responsibility. But if you're asking if it's your responsibility and you're really just trying to understand it and you come away going like, no, I don't think it is, then you're probably okay. Right.
Yeah. I think sometimes, and I think you would agree with this, but if you don't, feel free to disagree.
Are you
But
going to trigger me,
sometimes there
Jim?
might no, well, maybe. Nah. Um, sometimes there are karmic things.
Yeah.
So, but that I would say is still dealing with your stuff, however you get there. Um, it's just saying it's karma and not dealing with it, I think is the unhealthy aspect of that, uh, where you're not taking responsibility.
Yeah.
Um, is there any more to add to that? You think?
Well, I think I would just say that in most interactions, definitely not all, but I think in most interactions, there's give and take in all of that. So if you have something going on with somebody and it's uncomfortable or something happened, or there's there's a little bit of something in there for both people. I don't think an interaction usually happens just one-sided.
Well, no. I mean, uh, in my stress class, there's a communication worksheet, and the last box is it resolved? It's just like the trickiest thing for people.
Right?
If you ask people, a lot of times they'll be like, "Well, it's resolved." But if they're being honest, usually it's not resolved. "Well, what happened?" "Well, they said this and I said this, and it's over." "Well, is it really over or am I holding on to something?"
Mhm.
I remember getting into a, argument with, a doctor, and they're like, "Well, I'm a doctor," and I'm like, "Well, you're an idiot." Like, it doesn't matter if you have an MD behind your name. Like, there's common sense and logic too that exists, and you can't force something to happen because you want it to. You're working with human beings that have their own autonomy and make their own decisions. They don't just
Mhm.
comply with everything that you think they're supposed to do. Um, I don't think that person's listening to this show, so I'm okay. But
Yeah. No, but I totally agree. And it's another one of those things where and this is where, I think this is where things get hard because let's talk about narcissism for just a minute. There's a lot of narcissists that exist in this world that like to take things and twist them and turn them around and make you question everything you're doing and make
well,
you
the
feel
next
like,
one is neglecting personal boundaries. So
all
perhaps you
right,
can weave that in with that.
yeah, yeah. And so, and I think a lot of people who are light workers tend to, and I think there are narcissists in the spiritual community, but the people who tend to, in mass in the spiritual community, tend to be the ones who probably aren't narcissists. They're probably a little too naive. And so we aren't in our power. We aren't taking control of who we are and What are we doing here? And does what's being said actually make sense, or am I just trying to find an exit point or a way to give someone else my power? So I think a lot of this conversation is really about that too. Um, because on either side of this whole conversation, when you're talking about what is spiritual bypassing, you can twist it and turn it in all kinds of different ways. And it doesn't seem to always make sense. You know what I mean? And it's like it's neglecting the common sense. It's neglecting, we're going piecemeal here. We're just going to go situation by situation and see, am I ignoring something I need to pay attention to? Am I diving too much into the negative or diving too much into the positive? Am I keeping it balanced and understood? Where am I putting my energy? How am I feeding it? I just think those are all really good indicators of where you may be on all this.
Sure. Um, there's a lot to say about that.
I know, I
Where do I
know. It's like a whole
begin?
nother can of worms there.
Yeah, there is, and there's a lot of narcissists, right? Obviously, they can be very manipulative and very influential, and for a lot of smart people fall for that. Um, in the mindfulness or yoga communities, you have like the gurufication, right, of
Right.
somebody, or you see it time and time again. It is a pattern. Happens in all religions too. You have some pastor or, they get a podium and a pedestal, and, it's almost like this deification occurs where they can do no wrong, and then they get into trouble usually, sexually or, just inappropriate relationships with people. Going back to the boundary issue, right? Like, where
Yeah, yeah.
boundaries stop existing or they start overcoming boundaries that maybe they even preach or have or had at one point. Then they realize they have all this power and they can get away with certain things. And if you're not careful, you can give your power away and allow that to happen, particularly with people who are abusive to their spouse. If you're not paying attention to that, or you're telling yourself, oh, well, this is love, like, which I think is what they're saying is like you can allow this abuse to occur to you and or people that you care for. It could be a really difficult situation you can find yourself in.
Yeah, it's interesting when you're talking about abuse and things like that. So, and boundaries and so many things. And what I find really interesting, and I'm gonna go ahead and talk about this, and I don't talk about it too often, but I went through a period where I had people who practice dark magic really target me. And it was very abusive and very hurtful, very harmful. And I didn't do anything to deserve it. And it just felt so wrong. And what I learned in this process, and I honestly, and you might call this toxic positivity or whatever, I don't know, but what I learned is I couldn't fight when I delved into that energy, and even if I tried to do like return to sender or anything like that, it just made everything worse.
Can
When
you
I
explain what return to sender is? 'Cause I
return
didn't
to sender is
know
like, all right, Jim,
somewhere.
if you're going to send me bad energy, I'm going to be like, energetically, I'm returning all that energy back to you,
So if
right?
I curse you, you're gonna curse it's you're just gonna send it back, and now it's on your
No, yeah,
karma.
now you're cursing yourself, basically, So that's basically what that is. So, I tried different methods and ways of trying to approach it, but what really got it to stop, well, first there was karma from a past life I had to clear up. But before I even got to that, there was an up-leveling of my own spiritual consciousness about forgiving and loving. When I got into a truly forgiving and loving state, the vast majority of it just stopped. And I just forgave them. And I told them, I forgive you. And please forgive me for whatever my part in this is. And and I just really meant it. I was in that space. I wasn't just saying it. I was really in the space of unconditional love. You know, I'm sorry that we got into this. I don't even know how this happened, and I love you." And I did the Ho'oponopono to them, and which is, that whole Hawaiian prayer where I always start with "I love you." I know that people usually do it differently, but "I love you. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you." And,
It
I did
triggers me
that.
when you change the order on that. No.
What's that?
It
Did I
triggers
trigger
me when you
trigger?
change the order of it. No.
Right? I know.
It
Oh, sorry,
but a
Jim.
lovely practice, and it's just a wonderful thing to incorporate into your life. It's
It's
amazing the results that
amazing, and
come
there's
from
so
that.
many different ways you can use it. But when I did that, it was like the universe was like, "Okay, she finally got it." And then I was able to then clean up the mess that was created from all of that. But I couldn't clean up the mess until I got to that state. And if I sat in that negativity and, for lack of a better way of putting it, the victim state of having been so targeted, I never would have seen the end of it. It just I could not have gotten out of it, and no practitioners seemed to be able to get it to stop, and I went to some really good ones who knew what they were doing, and, but I think it was just that lesson I had to learn, and so, when you're talking about boundaries and things like that, there's also the other understanding that what you resist persists. So when you're talking boundaries, one of the things I talk to my clients about, if you're putting up boundaries out of like resistance, like I'm blocking you, you can't do that. Well, what I learned through that whole experience was that that just made everything so much worse. So what I started really working with is how do I just get into my power and command what I expect and what I want in that experience. And these psychopathic, narcissistic, dark magic practitioners, you know, they didn't care what I wanted, right? They wanted what they wanted. So that's what happened. And it was me practicing my very spiritual understandings of this and coming into that state of being that stopped the abuse.
So, by becoming more loving and perhaps more spiritually evolved, you were able to stop and really enact what you wanted to happen.
Well, because I think what happens, and I still think I've got work to do, like we all do. But what I realized what was going on is and this is true of anything happening in your life. It's not just dark magic or whatever, but they hook into or they tune into what is unhealed or what is like what I call a hook in you.
Your
And
vulnerability point.
yes, well, and the things that you still have to do work for, the things that
Mhm.
you're not perfect about. They hook into that and that's their access point. And so the goal is so one of the things for me was that karma that I had. And evidently I guess I had damned somebody to hell in a past life. And but whatever, okay, I own that. I will take that responsibility. And if I did or didn't do it, who knows? I don't remember that past life. It was shown to me by somebody else and I was like, "Okay," but it resonated. So I was like, if I did that, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. That's the last thing I want to do to anybody. So I really went in and dealt with that and cleared that as karma for myself. And then things really cleared up. So what happens is I don't know that it's necessarily that they stopped doing those things, but I was able to get to a point where I was here and their energies were here. So it was
Mhm.
like it couldn't latch on or affect.
Yeah, it wasn't landing. The arrows aren't hitting you.
Right, right. So and there's so many I've talked to so many people going through this whole situation, and there's every person I've talked to has a different point of view about it and how you should approach it. But this is really what helped me. And, you might call that spiritual bypassing because I wasn't in the muck. I wasn't in the fear. I wasn't in the woe is me of, the devastation that they tried to cause or anything like that. um, I would have my moments and I would be like, "Oh, okay, well, there's still that thing. Okay, I still need to work on healing that, but I'm not going to stay in there." So that's why I feel like I've got a very different perspective about all of this and how to handle the trauma of at least something like that, and how you can come out on the other side of it and and still be okay and still love
Yeah,
yourself.
I don't I don't think it would. be spiritual bypassing?
Well, I have talked with other people, and they're very much of the viewpoint like, no, you need to, fight fire with fire, or, you can't let them get away with that. But because basically it was like what Jesus taught, you turn the other cheek. That's pretty much what I did. I stopped fighting and just was not in resistance, but worked on myself. I went within and did the inner work to come out on the other side of it, and then still work with practitioners and things to help me clean up. Um, and it really helped. But I just think it's so important for people to understand that, when they're seeing things, and we've had conversations about this, but spiritual bypassing, a lot of people who use that word are using it to justify their victimizations in a way where they're mad at somebody and they want to feel that, and they're not getting past it. And what they're saying is, so this is the downside of all of that.
Yeah, say
You
more.
know, it's the opposite side of that pendulum, right? And it's funny what my guides say about pendulums. They say get off of the pendulum, rise above it, get off of the pendulum. So you might have like spiritual bypassing, complete opposite of spiritual bypassing, living in the drama or the emotion or whatever that's going on, and working through it through that, or spiritual bypassing and being over here, and then I'm like talking about this middle thing. But honestly, what they say about really any of the pendulums is to get off of the pendulum, come into a higher, wiser understanding, see it for all that it is, and then deal with it. Because if you're on either side, it's kind of like you're not getting the whole point.
Well, that to me is like being able to detach, to see things from a higher perspective and then go back in and do the
Yeah.
work, um, which is a wise thing to do.
But it's what
Which is
most people don't do.
well, but there are people that do it, right? Where you are able to see, like, if I'm seeing things from this perspective, I need to see it from another perspective. How do I do that? Like that
Right.
there are people that do operate in a higher level like that, that actually think and can have, nuanced discussions about a topic. It's not promoted nowadays. Like tends to go to a black and white type of thinking, right? Well, if it's not this, you're that, or this is good, this is bad. It's like, wow, that's really not smart at all. Like,
Yeah.
we're just not gonna like think about this issue. Um, a lot of people don't think. I guess I'll say that. Um, except for the people that listen to the show,
Right?
who are highly intelligent and
And
spiritually
us, of
evolved.
course. We always think, we're always very conscious. We always have it right.
When I spiritually bypass, it's a good thing. Um,
Yeah, right. It's because
there's
it's
some.
supposed to happen.
Oh my god, it's just a good topic. Um, they give some examples about how this might look like. I'll just read some of these, and then maybe we can like pick which ones maybe to kind of jump on. I only have love for you. That sounds like something a narcissist would say.
Mm.
Um, don't be so negative. It's all in divine order. Just let it go. Everything happens for a reason. Sending you good vibes. We're all one. Just trust the universe. Focus on the present. Negativity doesn't serve you. God, I think I've said all these.
Yeah, me too. I'm thinking, okay, all right, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Wow. Oh, there's some really good ones in this article too. So I mean, like some of those things, I guess they can be timely and accurate, but used another way could also
Mm.
be, placating somebody or not dealing with stuff. It
Yeah.
depends on how those words are being used. Are they being thoughtful or using them thoughtfully or not? Uh,
Yeah, good point.
10 signs you might be meandering: forced optimism, spiritual superiority, victim of your gifts. um, where that says your spiritual extrasensory gifts feel like a curse. Psychedelic escape, that's definitely a big one. Horoscope dependency,
Yeah.
saintly disguise. You shun your dark side because acknowledging it feels like a threat to your spiritual persona.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, that's probably more pervasive than people would realize. Over reliance on spirit guides. Mm, interesting. Prayer posit. No, sorry. Prayer passivity. So prayer is like the go-to for our solutions. I definitely come across that sometimes where people drop into prayer at the second, something happens, but they're not taking action,
Yeah. Yeah.
to solve anything. Guru glorification, which I think we touched on, and then finger pointing. You find endless faults with the world outside, diverting the gaze from your own inner world that might need attention. So,
All good things.
yeah, I'd say we could talk about this forever. There's, well, where would you say is your go-to or your best advice for how to stop it?
Well, I think it's a couple things. I like to take people into it's almost like an angelic point of view. So you rise up out of the whatever the situation is and you look down through the eyes of either your angel, or if it's in a relationship with someone else, look through maybe their angel or their higher self's eyes to try to see it from a different perspective, or to get a bigger idea of what this picture is. What is this situation about? What are you trying to learn? What are they trying to learn? What's happening in this, and why, as best as you can get it. And then to drop back in and to recognize where you're feeling certain things, not to ignore the feeling, and then figure out, well, what is behind that feeling? What are you thinking about that person or that situation or whatever's going on, or about yourself? And kind of allow yourself to work through that process. Acknowledge that, I don't know, maybe you've got an anger issue or whatever it is. Look at the darker side of yourself. Where do you have healing to do? But then dig deeper. Don't just sit there with that. Well, why do I have an anger issue? Why do I have this thing? Could it be past life? Did a trauma happen? Do I just feel like things don't go my way? Am I cursed? What is it? I don't know. And you try to figure it out. And how is it serving you? Because in some way, as a soul in this experience, it is serving you, right? Even the very difficult times. But that doesn't mean like that spiritual bypassing. Look at how it might be serving you. How can you get ahead? How could this actually turn out to be helping you in some way? Because sometimes when you're struggling so hard and things are so tough, you need that stroke of positivity or that idea or that hope that you could shift something into your favor to help you get through. It's when you're running that marathon and you've got like 5 miles left and you're totally exhausted. How do you get to the end of the marathon? How do you make it? You got to find it within yourself. You got to find the positivity. You got to find that hope that it's one step after a time, after another. And sometimes you have to get to that finish line and then go back and heal the things that you couldn't take the time to heal because you had to get to the finish line. That's not necessarily wrong either. I think there's a time and a place for all of it. And so I would just encourage people that if they're ignoring it, they're probably wrong about it. You don't just ignore something, it's not going to go away. But if you're sitting in it and not making any progress, you're probably wrong about it too. There's
Yeah,
there's
stewing
somewhere
in it.
else you need to be or something else you're not aware of. And then I would recommend, if you can't figure it out, get help. Go to a counselor, go to a coach. Find somebody who you align with and work through it.
Yeah. Um, so the first thing in the article that talks about is self-awareness, um, which I would say is, being mindful.
Yeah.
bringing awareness to yourself, your situation, your thoughts, your emotions, um, not, stuffing it down, which is a lot of guys do, uh, but females do too. Um, if you get triggered, paying attention to why, not running from it, being honest with yourself about these things. I learned that from you. It was the exercise. We were like, "Well, what are the lies that you tell yourself?" And I
Right.
was like, "Man, I haven't asked myself this question, but I know that there's actually stuff here. Like, I really don't want to do this, but
Right.
now the only reason that you would do it is because you would get something out of it, right? Like it's a worthwhile exercise. Um, so what else? Not running from things, not pushing them away, not avoiding them, being kind to yourself.
Yeah.
As you do all these things, be patient, cultivate your inner compassionate coach, which is just kind of how you talk to yourself when you're going through especially difficult times. And what else? I'm trying to think what else you said. Curiosity, being very curious about things, but not to the point where you get stuck and
Yeah.
wallow, which sometimes people do. And they just get that wallow in certain emotions and they don't make any forward progress. Um, don't be afraid to fail, but if you're going to fail, just fail forward. Like, just keep making progress. Um, and yeah, be patient with the process. There's no rush with anything. You are where you are right now for a reason. So just pay attention to that, and you know, do what you can, and on the journey.
Yeah, this journey's not for the faint of heart, right?
Well, you chose to be here, so buckle up.
Right. All right, let's go.
All right, Jen. Well, spiritual bypassing, we won't do it anymore until the next time we do it. But
Right. That's so true. Aw.
all right.
Well, thanks,
Well,
guys.
thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next time.
All right, bye.
Bye.
We are so grateful that you joined us. Check out the description to learn more about us and also for additional resources to help you on your journey.